that are not aware, IDF has two networks of people living with diabetes. We have us, the young leaders, and we have the Blue Circle Voices. And Ricardo would like to explain about the Blue Circle Voices for us, my dear. Would you like to keep explaining about the Blue Circle Voices network? Since you seem to know a lot about them, right? No? Ah, okay. Just kidding, guys. Okay, so we have, as I was saying, we have the other network of people living with diabetes that also have family members, and it's called the Blue Circle Voices. Some of you are also part of this other network. So I'd like to invite my dear friend Bridget to talk about a topic that she's an expert, and hopefully after this session we all be better prepared how to deal with press. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Bridget McNulty, I'm from South Africa. I have no slides, but apparently there is a slide for me. There we go. I am the co-founder of Sweet Life Diabetes Community, which is South Africa's largest online diabetes community. And I'm also the co-founder of SA Diabetes Advocacy, which is an organization of all the diabetes organizations of people with diabetes in South Africa. So all the not patient organizations, all the diabetes advocacy groups, we're under one non-profit umbrella. And the co-founder of the Diabetes Alliance, which is all the organizations, associations, and companies working with diabetes in South Africa. So I've co-founded 3 nonprofits. I feel like I'm done now. I'm not going to be doing any more of those. I've also been living with type 1 for the last 15 years. And, you know, all the other stuff, right? That's all anyone cares about here is like what organization you're aligned with and how long you've been living with diabetes. Also a mom of 2. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. I like hiking and yoga and swimming in the sea and reading books and all of that jazz. But I'm here today to talk to you specifically about how to prepare for speaking with media. And I'm going to keep it as short as possible because I think you're probably all quite exhausted from people talking to you all day. So I only have 3 things I'm going to share with you. The first is, when you're speaking to the media, only have 3 things you want to share with them. Mainly because there's research that's been done that says you can only keep 3 to 4 new thoughts in your mind at a time. And so you want to make sure that the things that you share are as succinct and important as possible so that they're going to be able to share those 3 things. We started Sweet Life 11 years ago, and one of our main goals is to bring diabetes more into the media spotlight. So in South Africa, as I'm sure in many of your countries, everyone's super interested in diabetes in November. And then December to October, no one really wants to talk about it. And so we've been trying to create kind of media-friendly talking points around diabetes so that we can get on radio and on TV and in newspapers and online as much as possible. And it's working. It's working slowly, but it's working. And so when you're thinking of the 3 points, think of the things that you absolutely want to land. So what's difficult about a media interview is that you never know really how long it's going to be. So radio, you probably have 5 minutes. Sometimes they'll give you up to 30, but you usually have about 5 minutes. TV, you can have like 5 to 10 minutes, but then you never know if they're going to go on some weird segue. And so you want to make sure that you know exactly what your points are and you land them as soon as possible. Ideally, you want to have one like critical point and get that in as soon as you can and say to the presenter, I really want to talk about XYZ. So please, so for example, the last TV interview I did, we had this Wear Blue for Diabetes campaign on World Diabetes Day where we invited the whole country to wear blue in support of people living with diabetes. So I said to the presenter before we went live, I was like, if you don't give me an easy way to talk about this, I'm just going to randomly shoehorn it in. So please make sure that there's a chance for me to talk about Wear Blue for Diabetes. But then we started talking about other things. He spoke to there were 3 panelists. They told a very long diagnosis story, and I could see that he was getting ready to do the wrap-up, and I was like, don't forget to wear blue for diabetes. And he was like, oh yeah, I was about to say that. So you want to make sure that you have your primary point and then at most like another 2 points that you can land because you won't have time to land more than that. So that's point 1. Point 2 is to make it personal. So everyone here has a lived experience of diabetes, and that's the stuff that people care about. Like, we're all humans, right? And people in the media are also humans, and they want to know your story. They want to know why they should care. And the way that they will care the most is if they can connect to you personally. What's tricky is you might not necessarily know which part of your story is the good bit. And I would encourage you, while you're here surrounded by other people who care about the same things as you, to kind of share your stories and test out which bits land and which bits don't. Because odds are you've got like a great story, but it's hidden in between all this other random fluff that doesn't really matter. So maybe you had this hectic diagnosis and that's what made you want to get involved in diabetes advocacy, or maybe you knew someone who got sick and that's what made you want to get involved, or there was some critical tipping point, but you need to make it as succinct and simple as possible. So, for example, I was diagnosed very suddenly, and when I was discharged from hospital, I was desperately sick. They gave me all this information to read, and I read everything they gave me because I was so terrified. And everything in there said, you're now at greater risk of heart disease, kidney failure, blindness, amputation. And nowhere in anything that I read did it say, or you can live a perfectly normal, happy, healthy life with diabetes if you look after yourself. Like, literally, there was not one line anywhere. And so that became our mission with Sweet Life, is to show that it's possible to live a happy, healthy life with diabetes. And I repeat that over and over again because it's not just a happy life, right? Like, we all know you can live a happy life with diabetes where you're eating what you want and pretending you don't have diabetes and living your best life, and then you feel like hell later on, and you have long-term complications to worry about. But it's not really happy because you're not healthy. But then if you only focus on the healthy, you can have a perfect HbA1c and an awesome time in range, but you're eating, what are you eating? Like, no carbs ever. What is life without carbs? So there's got to be a balance between it being happy and healthy. So that's the personal story that I bring in, and it's because it's what I actually really care about. Like, I want people with diabetes to know that that's possible because I didn't know that. And then my third point, we're nearly there, guys, is you want to balance the personal with data. So I stole this point from Renza Shibilia from Diabetes Australia, because she said that in her advocacy efforts, she would come out and be like, guys, you should really care about diabetes. Here's the personal experience. It's so hard. These are things that have helped. These are things that don't help. And she could see all the doctors and academics and media all like nodding their heads and being like, oh yeah, cool story, thanks. And then they would bring out an academic or scientist afterwards who would be like, oh, all that emotional stuff she just discussed, here's the science to show that it's actually true. And with the data backing, that's the sucker punch, right? So you can have the emotion, you can have the heart, and you can have the head, but just the science on its own is boring and no one cares. And just the emotion on its own, they care, but they're not going to do anything about it. So anytime, this comes back to your 3 points. You need to land the emotion, and then you need to back it up with data and with science and with, like, preferably national data, like specifically stuff that no one can argue with. I always go to statistics, South Africa, because no one can argue with that. So that's it. Those are my 3 points. Then I just want to quickly talk about actually how to get an interview, because Beatrice and Bruno threw that in the last confirmation email, and I was like, oh, okay. It depends very much on your country. So in South Africa, we work with a PR company, but you don't want to work with a big PR company because they are very expensive. So you want to find someone who cares about diabetes in some way, maybe even an individual who already has press contacts, because that makes life a lot easier, and then you don't have to go and individually knock on every single door. But we only do that for the big events. So we'll do that like for our big November drive, or if there's a specific campaign that we really want to get out about. And the rest of the time, we're just building relationships. And you can start doing that now. And I'm not sponsored by LinkedIn, but I want to say that LinkedIn is your best friend, because in this room, there is so much power already. And in this conference, there is like enormous contacts you can make. So anyone who comes to speak to you here, connect with them on LinkedIn, connect with all of each other on LinkedIn. Anytime you see a diabetes segment, you can reach out and connect with the journalist or the radio presenter or the TV presenter. There's so much that comes from just building that web of networks and connections, and it's so easy to do. And then the other point I would say is make it as easy as possible for journalists. I'm a writer, and so I used to work for a magazine, and we would get sent press releases all the time. And it's exhausting, and so you just delete them after reading the first sentence. But if you got sent a personal email that was like, hey Bridget, I know you have a health segment on Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and last week you were talking about hypertension, would you maybe like to talk about diabetes this week? Here is a very simple 2-sentence explanation of what I can tell your listeners. That's really hard to say no to. So just bear in mind that all journalists, whether they're online or newspaper or radio or TV, they're all frantic. They all want to get home at the end of the day. They want work to be done. They want their lives to be as easy as possible. So package it so that it can be as easy as possible. Listen to them like you do the homework. Do the homework and be like, oh, this really would fit in well in the lifestyle pages of their magazine. Or, oh, this would be a really good fit for the health feature that they do every second Tuesday of the month. And then try to tailor your message as closely as possible so that you're doing the work for them. And then it's a lot easier to get in. And if they don't reply, then do a gentle follow-up, and then keep doing gentle follow-ups, and eventually they will reply. But my other tip with the LinkedIn thing is if they don't reply, then go connect with them on LinkedIn, and then they see your name again. They're like, oh, crap, I got an email from that person I forgot to reply to. So just bear in mind that they're all humans, and try to make it as simple as possible for them. And I should have had like a good outro line, but my brain is fried from listening to scientific talks all day. So I got nothing, guys. Good luck. Best wishes. Any questions? Should have been my final line. Yes.
My question is, and I know this sounds a bit stupid, but how do you not embarrass them on their own talks? So I'm going to give you an example of what happened. We were called once for an interview. I'm sorry, I'm Raya from Lebanon, sorry. We were called once for an interview, and it was live. And during the show, the reporter asks a female living with type 1 diabetes, aren't you worried about your children? I mean, how are you even trying to get pregnant? And that was on her show. And the girl was trying so hard not to slap her. So how do you deal with questions like these?
I got nothing. No, so dumb questions are part of it, inevitably part of it. And another thing that is inevitably part of it is people using unintentionally offensive language, and so they'll be like, here's Bridget McNulty, she's been suffering with diabetes for the last 15 years. No, it gets worse. They'll say, she's been living with a disease that she suffers from. And I'm like, and so I've stopped taking that one. I'm like, first of all, I'm not suffering, I'm actually doing quite well, thanks very much. Not a disease, it's a condition. But people will be offensive. I try to be magnanimous and kind and recognize that they don't mean to be offensive, and so try to like almost rise above it and say, so in that example I would say, well, that's actually a common misconception that women with type 1 diabetes can't have healthy pregnancies, and it comes from the days when we didn't have access to medicine, and so it probably wasn't possible, but that's kind of an outdated view. So these days, so you like gently correct them, but absolutely correct them. Because that's the trouble too, right, is that no one else is going to correct them. We're actually going to start next year a big language and diabetes movement, which a lot of other countries have done. We are quite behind in it. But it's because that stuff makes a difference. Like, I feel really passionate about media because it does make a difference. That's where people are getting their information from. And so, for example, in South Africa, many times I'll write the articles and send them out, and then they publish them online. And the illustration is like a plate of sugar, or like obese people turned away with their heads chopped off. Like, could you get any more dehumanizing? And it's because, in my kinder moments, it's because there isn't good stock imagery. And so that's a big thing that we're going to be doing too. And what you guys could do, if you're comfortable being like a face for diabetes in your country, like, take some photos this week. Get your friends to take photos of you injecting and testing and like scanning and all of that kind of thing, because there isn't actually imagery available. And I've seen what they're using. They're using Unsplash, because that's the only place you can get free imagery. And when you search diabetes on Unsplash, you get a plate of sugar and you get an obese person turned away with their head chopped off. And so and you get like one or two other images, but often they're sponsored by pharmaceuticals, which is also kind of dodgy. So if you guys, I mean, could we look at the diversity in the room, and you're all very attractive, like you could be the new faces of diabetes on Unsplash, and that kind of thing makes a difference. Like the language that we use and the imagery that we use changes stigma in almost a subconscious way, because it's not that people are reading an article and looking at the picture and thinking, well, now I feel weird about people with diabetes. It's that they're reading it and thinking, oh, this is just people with diabetes are eating plates of sugar, I guess.
Yeah, so maybe I would just add a comment to that. What helped me is that I tried to prepare for the interviews by asking them, could you send me an email with the questions you're going to ask or with the topic you're going to talk about? And then like they write dumb stuff, and then I'm like, could we phrase it like this? And then I provide them answers what I'm going to talk about, and then they say, okay, we're going to need to make it shorter, and then like you literally put the words in their mouth, because you actually want them, while interviewing you, to give you the chance to talk about what you want to actually talk about. So maybe preparing them in advance and like forcing them to, play dumb and like, well, what are we going to talk about? Like, can you be more specific? And then they're going to like, because they have to prepare for every show, like no matter what it is. And I guess that was something that helped me avoid those kind of questions, because you just get frustrated.
That's a great point, yeah. And also helpful for you to be able to prepare, especially. Thank you.
Hi, Sabina from Slovakia. So basically I was a part of Young Leaders Camp, which organizes IDF Europe this year. And I don't know if you know Elizabeth Dupont. It doesn't matter. So basically she noticed I was running around with a camera because I love photography. And she asked me whether I could take pictures of like young leaders or like people with diabetes wearing their gadgets in like natural environment. And I did a lot of pictures. So in case you want to talk about it more and you would like to, that's actually my plan B for the project, in case my first project will not work out, to actually try to combine art with gadgets and people with diabetes.
That's a fantastic idea. And honestly, it makes such a profound difference, because that was the other thing I thought when I was first diagnosed. I was diagnosed 15 years ago, and my first thought was like, I don't want to join this club, it's full of losers. Because the only association I had with people with diabetes was like sick people. And I didn't want to be part of like a weird sick people club. But like, look at this club. This is an awesome club. Anyone would want to join this. But this is not the picture that people are thinking of when they think of diabetes. And that's actually quite easy to fix now because of things like Unsplash and media libraries and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Right, right. Okay, I don't know how to do this. Right, so basing with your experience, like as a person who has always been on TV, radio, that kind of a thing, newspapers. So usually, like, I relate so much with what you said. You said you have to sort of like find someone who likes like diabetes, and it's not always the case, because usually the people, they're just doing it for their work. Usually, maybe say in the month of November, they'll actually approach you to say, hey, we want to do this kind of a thing. So as a person who might have sort of like more affiliations, and you give them sort of like the information that they should write about you, and then when they like sort of like misspell it and write it wrongly, and then you actually send them the picture that they should use, and then they don't, the things that you say they should write about, because I mean, we also say language matters, but then if they also try to rephrase in a way to sort of like, yes, I've written an article, I give them an article, but they want to sort of like, maybe the person who approached you, she wants to be sort of like the one who has written it, so they will try to rephrase it. So like, and then it would mean different things, but then it has your name on it. So like, how do you sort of like deal with that? Because I mean, I get that a lot, and usually I don't have to share that, because it would drain me, and I would feel like I want to kill that person when that happens. Yeah. It's so bad. I don't know why they do it. I don't know.
So they do it so that their editors will be happy, because if they accept what they are sent, it looks like they're not doing their job, and perhaps because they have to edit it into the style of whatever their publication is. But the trouble is, when it's something like diabetes, that's dangerous, because you can switch like a couple of words that seem like they wouldn't really make a difference, and then you're saying something that's just factually incorrect. So I always use the royal we, and I say, we ask to check everything before publication. Please, could you send it through to me just so that I can double check the facts are straight? Don't say, I ask to check things, because then it sounds like you're just like particular and difficult to work with. So just say, we always ask to double check the facts before it's published. Would you mind sending through the final draft? And usually people will be comfortable doing that. Because they also don't want to publish anything that's factually incorrect. They just need it to be in their voice, whatever their voice is.
And on that note, always outsource the responsibility. So for example, if you cannot do something or you don't want to do something, you say that your team cannot do it. Or then if the team is not enough, you say your director, and then you escalate for the board or whatever. So
Bruno, you've definitely sent me emails before saying that your team is incapable of dealing with whatever I'm asking you for. Busted!
You got the message before. I'm sorry. No, but seriously, like when you, as Bridget was saying, when you put on the collective, it makes it stronger. Like no one will email like 10 people asking why not, but definitely they will follow up on you personally. So just
Yeah, good point. It worked for me. I was too scared to follow up with Bruno because his team couldn't help me.
Hi, Renata from Mexico. Us as patients, we share our testimony, but how we can get away from medical questions? Because the media always change the questions and the subject of the interview, and how you can get away of that medical part that we don't want to share misinformation of diabetes, because that's why we are work. No, like how can we get away of that?
Yeah,
gently.
That's a great question. So people will definitely ask you medical questions, and just start by saying, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't answer that. But then you can say, in my experience, because it'll generally be something that you have an experience of. So they'll be like, why does this thing that happens happen? And you'll be like, well, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't tell you that. But in my experience, when it's happened to me, this is how it's felt. And then just bring it back to the personal. And they should know that if they want to ask medical questions, they have to get a doctor on the show.
Thanks.